Hi, this is Dr. Scott, and today we're going to get into apologetics. And you're going, yeah, but I thought you always talked about the Nasara thing. Guess what? Apologetics is my like nearly second favorite in that way. Why? Because you know what? As we move out of the issues of the Nasara or into post Nasara things, there are going to be two areas that we need to focus on: end time issues and apologetics. Why? Because you need to know what you believe. So many people have no clue what in the world we're talking about. And if you don't have a basis in it, you have no clue how to be able to defend your faith. And that is super important to me with that too. So I'm going to do several videos that are on this particular topic. In the back is a book called The Truth and Lies and What We Believe. And in the future, I will be writing more books like that that get deeper into that one point. But the free will predestination gets into some really cool areas. And I'll even do a video upon that. So you have a clue about it as well with that. Okay, so we're going to do a PowerPoint here, and we'll bring it up on the screen here. So, is God fair? Now, in listening to one of my favorite guys out there, Dr. Frank Turek, I would love to have had Dr. Turek on the show. We had some schedule conflicts, and I could never get through his personal assistant person. We couldn't get into the right time frames, and I was really saddened about that. But it's something I believe that we can definitely get into again with him sometime in the future. God's got a plan for that. But here's the thing: his one point was most of the people who ask questions to him, and frankly, when they ask questions to me, it's almost the same thing. And they talk about morality. But I also kind of go into this conversation: is God fair? And by the way, the Bible explains it and explains it in significant excuse me significant detail. So let's talk about that. And it's actually in the book of Romans. And most people who don't spend any time on Romans, it was one of my deepest studies back in 2009 or 10. I'm going to miss the date. It might have been 2010, where I really was hitting that one particularly hard. And now I've been studying apologetics since, I was a freshman or sophomore or something or other in college with that too. But only in the last about 12 years have gone, or 15 years have gone very deep on those particular areas with that too. So let's do that together here. So when we look at is God fair, we have to ask the question, what in the world is fair? So let's talk about some of those questions with that too. And this is why people struggle in these answers. Is God fair to everyone at the same time? Now, one of my books called Revelations of the Red Pill, let's just say, and there's a very big conversation about the IRS and how the IRS will be deleted and how people will be paid back. But let me ask you a question. If I had a person who's been making six figures all of her life and her best friend is a friend that they meet for coffee regularly, and her best friend only works a job that is making 30 or no more than 40K over the years. Let's say they high school friends and they still meet together. One's that successful lawyer, let's say, that has a six-figure job, and the other one has been making $30,000-$40,000 a year. Do you think that the IRS is going to give back some or portions of the money, and it's going to be fair to each person? No, it's not going to be fair. Is God ever been fair to you in all the ways, shapes, and form? The answer is you have no idea what fair is. Actually, C.S. Lewis had a great statement. We have no idea what a straight line is because we're too close to the line. In essence, if we were able to come up to a 40,000-foot view of a road that is listed on a map as a big straight line, we'd realize that line, when we get closer to it, it's very squiggly, but out there in the ethosphere, when we get far out, what we find is that line looks pretty straight. And see, we have perspective problem, and fairness is a perspective problem with that. What does it mean to follow the law? I have people who talk about this all the time, whether they are believers or unbelievers, and they have no idea what that means. I've had conversations with people about what's called what are regulations, what are mandates, and what is a law. A mandate has never been passed into law. Whereas when we look at those things, they actually exist in Scripture. Mandates are conversations, and I don't want to support the government on their idiotic mandate points, right, or regulations that they act like they're laws. But if we put mandates or regulations, what they are is just a path to follow in essence. And if the path was in justice, I mean, we might have a different conversation with that. Regulations are basically how would you accomplish something. Mandates are things that God might bring down to the people and say, you know what, it's a good idea if you don't eat, particular types of meats. And he talks about that, right? And so we have elevated some of those things because of something that God has said, and we've elevated those to the level of law. And the answer is in Romans 7, it tells us over and over again, there's no way to follow the law all the way through. So we struggle with this. What the heck is righteousness? We think we know what that is, but I'm telling you right now, you have no idea. What's faith as opposed to the other religions? See, some people call faiths, what faith are you? Right? And they're meaning, whether they're meaning a Muslim versus a Buddhist concept or whatever they were getting into, right? Sometimes they mean faiths as, a Methodist church versus the Baptist church, right? And you're going, and yet what it does is it waters the word down of the word called faith, and we have no idea what that even means. What is faith as opposed to belief? We'll get into that one. What does distinction have the ability to do? I'm not just talking about like a distinction award, that you might get, but distinction award actually has some meaning to it. How should I be sin conscious? I mean, lots and lots of churches answer this question, but they get it kind of wrong because they're so focused on the sin. And what does redemption mean? So we're going to get into all these, including can I be justified freely by God? This messes with people almost more than any of the rest of the questions do as well. Okay, so righteousness as an overall concept actually means in the Greek, specifically, equity. Now, you hear people talk about things like DEI, right? DEI talks about equity. Women will talk about equity in salaries with men, right? And we talk about these things called white privilege, and we think that they have something in relation to equity. No, equity means in reality, and righteousness has a conversation about equity, but here's what it means. It means to be equal in all things. And by the way, did you know that the Bible, over and over again, when it talks about women, it says that we are co-heirs together in Christ, meaning men and women are co-heirs. That is an equity if I've ever heard one, and it was listed 2,000 years ago. When some people say that the Bible doesn't talk about inequity, it talks about men subjugating women. No, it doesn't. You don't understand your own Bible. But righteousness talks about an equity with God, which is even more important. What righteousness means is to be completely justified. It is outside of the box. In essence, what this little picture here is kind of cute, that the heart goes through the cross. That you are completely justified when you have righteousness with Christ, meaning you don't have anything wrong inside of you. I know that messes people up, but that's what the word talks about. It means that you're also completely pure. What? I just remember the sin I did a little bit ago, right? You can think of that. And who is the one who accuses you of those sins? Satan. He's the accuser of the sins. And yet, God sees you as equal to him, not your God, but equal to him in equity of the position that you're given through Christ. You are completely justified by the blood of Christ and you're completely pure. And lastly, righteousness is only activated by faith. Now, you might go, okay, you just lost me there. Faith is the only conversation that we can have with God. I'll show you that. That's gonna freak you out. I want you to plant that back in the back of your brain. If you're taking notes, write that down. Faith is our only communication with God. It'll make sense to you in a second. Okay. So we have this thing of what's justification. That's why I use this little thing right here. That is an example of what justification is. It means to have equal weighting, which has a point of equity. It is rendered to one who is just. Meaning, rendered means to take it out of your wallet in essence and give it to the other person because they have the quality of justice in them. Whoa. It's rendered to one who is also innocent. That's why I use this thing of the court systems. You see, when the court systems talk about having justice is blind, no, it's not, because they have so much bias in there. They're actually opposite of the concept of justice. It's actually should be called, instead of the Department of Justice, the Department of Injustice, because they don't even have a clue what the word means in the Greek so that they could operate that way. If someone walks into court and they've been accused of a crime, they have to be seen fully as innocent until proven unjust, or we call guilty. I mean, we haven't followed that. And many people, I don't care where you are on the political sphere of this thing, you struggle in that one area because I can tell you that courts have never been just. And so don't expect a court ever to be just no matter what happens in this, because only God has the ability to be just. Scott's not just. Scott's not innocent, necessarily in and of himself. So don't expect for me to dispense that ability to you, because only God can do that for you. Innocence indicates a point of righteousness. It means if you're innocent, you don't have anything wrong inside of you. You don't have any unright points within you. And here's the fascinating part. Perfect understanding of righteousness is called justification. That means the lawyer or the judge, more specifically, those judges that you see on the benches, when they operate in unrighteousness, what they're doing is they have no ability to be a judge. And we saw this in court cases against Trump. For instance, in the New York court case with idiot Letitia, who's out there, and with the idiot judge that was around this, both of them have naked pictures out there in the world. And they were the judge was saying to the jury that you don't all have to agree on a quality. A few of you could agree one way and a few of you agree the other way, and then I'm gonna render the justice in that way. Like, no, every single time you have a jury trial, they all have to agree, or at least have a majority of agreement. And yet in the Donald Trump kind of circumstance, they had 4 people agreed one way, 4 people agreed with the other way. Is that a jury of 12 that really came up with the right ruling? In essence, what he was doing is operate in his complete injustice with that too. And so someone who is a judge has to understand they don't even have a clue about the laws. So how can they actually be righteous. That's a problem. I would never want to be called a judge ever. The complete ability to accomplish righteousness inside the law means that only Jesus could do it. Do you see how, like, oh my gosh, this is way too deep for me? You see, when some people tell you a statement, Jesus is not coming back until his bride or the church or however they want to call it is completely pure. Like, you don't have the ability to be completely pure outside of Christ. So how are you going to do something about that? And you have to have a complete ability, means no ability to do sin, means you can't have any unrighteousness. You have to be fully innocent. You see, the only way we are is through Christ, which means our full-on dependency is like us hugging Christ at every single event that we go through our life. That's how deep this thing goes. So in a summation, one of the things that I like to do is kind of give a good summation here. I'm trying to be better on that one too. How does righteousness in the new definition change your understanding of sin? How does that? Now, I want you to write these down, and I want you to ask this, and this could be a good Bible study that you could do. Like, how does it mean if righteousness means perfection, then how does that change with sin? It means you already are the sinful creature, but in Jesus, you're not sinful anymore. Oh my gosh, that messes people up. What is the difference between justice in heaven and justice on earth? Well, justice on earth is never going to be fair. It is never going to be just. Don't expect it to. Ooh. Whoa. That's some heavy stuff, right? And yet, we expect the justice on earth to operate the same way that it would be in heaven, which is completely fair. It ain't fair, and it's never going to be fair. And when you try to keep asking for that, you're always disappointed. Is not having faith in God a sin? Yes. You guys need to talk about that one. It's a great point with that too. And what's the difference between faith and belief? Let's talk about that one. But before we understand that, now that we know justice means a complete point of being innocent, and righteousness has those kind of quality, there's this weird statement. And I'm going to read it for you here. And I got to pull this up here, so it takes a second to pull this up here. Okay. And it's in Romans, obviously, because we're talking in Romans 3, verse 22. Okay. So, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe, for there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Okay, so let's go backward to verse 22. It says, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ. So you have righteousness only inside of believing and having faith. Trust is a part of trust for all who believe, because there is no distinction. Let me tell you that word. That word totally is interesting. First off, we know what justice is. It means that you're rendered innocent. We know what righteousness means. It's completely purified. And the word distinction actually means this: the ability to understand the sounds coming from two separate instruments. And you go, what? Wait, what? I remember when I first read that, and I'm studying about that particular thing. I'm like, is that what distinction means? You know, when someone gets a distinction award, it separates them out from the crowd and says, you are the distinguished, the distinguished medal of honor, right? Or the distinguished employee of the month, in essence. And yet that has a little bit to do with it. We have a little concept of it, but we don't fully understand it. As a musician myself, I remember my wife and my son when they were going through homeschooling. And I remember in 2010, my son's got 12 or something like that at the time frame, 11, 12. And they were playing a game on purpose. They were playing what's called Wii Music. I'm gonna pull this off the screen for half a second. And in Wii Music, it would play two different instruments, like a little bandy thing playing this instrument sound and then this one. They were the same pitch, they were the same volume, but what we call it is a word called timbre. That's why when a different instrument, like this thing called an oboe, what most people don't want it to, it looks like a clarinet, but it has a little reedy thing on the bottom. It's a very thin, reedy part. It sounds a little like a a flute. It sounds a little like a clarinet, but it has a different quality to you when you listen to it. And so in there, they had to pick out which instrument from which group it was coming from. And at first it was pretty easy because you could tell like the difference between a note from a piano and the same note from a guitar, and you could pick out the groups. But then it got progressively harder the farther it got. So I'm sitting there researching this, right? And then I'm watching over on the side, watching them play Wii Music and going, that is exactly what it's talking about in there. And that's why I bring this up, that the Bible is utilizing words that have so much depth we don't understand. You see, only God is that great musician who actually understands that justice plus righteous means a distinction, an ability to sound so different. And only musicians fully understand the word distinction. As a musician myself, I know when a guitar is a quarter pitch off, in essence. Okay. And I mean, it'll make me crazy. No, the person who has no distinction ability, that's a person who sings the monotone. Bringing in the sheep, bringing in the sheep. We will keep on bringing in the sheep. And they sound like that. And you're like, that doesn't sound right. But to their ear, we're not talking about their hearing, but to their brain and how they're processing the brain, they can't tell the difference in the different pitches. And so I remember this guy, John Kuntz, who was a wonderful man, but he could sing in the Lord and with joy, but he was completely monotone because he had no distinction ability. Versus the normal person listening to it, they would have a clue, maybe that the guitar was out of tune, and the musician's just freaking out over there, wanting to rip the guitar out of the hand, retune it, and give it back to the musician because it makes them crazy, right? That's the level that God talks about this. Okay, so there's a interesting conversation about law, sin, and redemption. These are all actually business transactions. Let me explain that. Law is the prescriptive use of the whole law. What? Prescription is like when you have a prescription, like your physician gives you a prescription and it tells you not just the prescription on the page, but you need to like utilize this over a period of time before we get maximum medical relief, right? And if you didn't utilize the prescription, for instance, one of the worst things, excuse me, people do with antibiotics is they only utilize them for a short period of time. If your antibiotic was supposed to be for 10 days, most people never use it the whole 10 days. They only use it for a shorter period of time, and they can't prescriptively do it. That means they're not following the law because the prescription is laid out. Sin is missing the mark by any amount. In the Greek word, the Greek word for this is called harmatia. Harmatia was then translated in Middle English Now, Middle English, you couldn't speak Middle English if you thought it was. People talk about the Old Testament. I mean, sorry, the King James version is Old English. No, it's not. That's called Modern English. Shakespeare wrote and spoke his plays in modern English. It's just not familiar enough to us. But if you listen to, I had a professor who could speak Middle English, and it sounds like a German slash weird, English thing in there, and only about every third word can you even understand what it is. And sin is pulled from that. And it's an archery term. So what happens they didn't have like, concentric circles when you do archery. They had one center area. And if you didn't hit that one center area, even if it was off by 2 inches or by a foot and a half and didn't even hit the overall basic target, like the hail bay, I mean, the little bit of hay, the bit of hay bale, excuse me, I could not say that one. So forgive me. That hay, and then they put that little mark on there. And even if you missed the bale of hay there, it wouldn't matter if it was 2 inches off or 5 feet. And so what I want you to realize is missing the mark, think about the mark of the beast, is pure on sin. And it creates a debt to God because sin actually has a debt. You create a debt up with God and you have to pay it back. Well, the only way to pay it back is either you pay it back in the end, meaning hell, or you have to pay it through the blood of Christ. That's why when Jesus talked about a debtor prison, the people that go into a debtor prison normally in ancient time frames, they would be if they were in debtor prison for a little bit, their family might find a way to pay it off. But debtor prison actually was a death sentence in most situations because they never could pay it off. It was a debt that was way too deeply owed. And that's how deep it is, because debtor prison is an example of sin. It's an unpayable debt that you can't possibly do. Redemption is then a releasing of the debt. So when we talk about this in different ways, you could say, if a debt was paid off, which we talk about this in the Nassar area, right? We have debt forgiveness. It is a redemption of the debt. Who gets the debt? See, debt doesn't just disappear. See, some people think that monetary debt just disappears in the ethosphere, right? Because they created it in nowhere land, right? Now that's not even partially true. Debt has to go somewhere. You see, when I created debt in my business when I was back in 2009, when I started the business in 2006, and by 2009 I was 90% debt to income. There was no way of doing it. I should be in debtor prison, which is bankruptcy, right? Is a deletion of the whole thing. And yet the only way to redeem it was to actually release the effect of it. And so once I paid that off, in essence, some level of debtor prison, and I paid it off, then I was redeemed from it. But it was a process of paying it out. Well, because you can't possibly pay out sin, there you go. Do you see? Redemption only comes with Christ. And by the way, these same words, all these words are financial words. Fascinating. Oh. Okay. Faith is a strange kind of thing. Faith is a moral conviction based upon a truth, fully persuaded by the truth, right? Like you walk up and you have a credit card, you're fully persuaded as long as that machine works, right? She doesn't have a broken machine that she brings you when you're paying for the bill. If you have a full conviction a full understanding that you pop that credit card on, you have enough money on the credit card to pay for it. That's called faith. By the way, people use this faith in all kinds of different ways, but they don't realize it. Faith has nothing to do with like going to the Methodist church, the Mormon church, the whatever has nothing to do with that. That's the unfortunate. I'm not trying to cuss here, but the word called bastardized comes from a situation of an improper situation of relationship, right? So in essence, what we've done is we've bastardized the word faith. Again, I wasn't cussing there. I was trying to tell you an actual meaning, a deep meaning of what that word comes from. But when you have a full on conviction that based upon the truth, you're fully persuaded by that truth, that's what faith comes from. Now, belief is deeper than faith. It is a complete trust in the righteousness of Christ or his perfection. So it's like this little light that we know that the smaller the light, the less heat that it gives, right? But as the bigger the light, it is part of faith, but we have this ability to see that light will give more heat off, right? So in another way of thinking about this too is a complete trust that if we protect that light, the wind won't blow against it. So in essence, what belief is a complete trust in the righteousness of Christ and his ability to accomplish things. And when we have that and these things work together, oh, you're you're unstoppable. But I see people put these things called hope in the middle of it, and they try to tell you that I've just lost all my faith. No, you lost your hope. If you had operated in your belief, which is an understanding of faith, and you operated in your faith, your hope would be fine. It doesn't mean you're not irritated by that thing that you've lost, but it is a hope, not belief or faith. The word propitiation was a very difficult word for me, and I remember even at the time studying it, my friend Will was sitting with me. He goes, "Okay, what?" And he asked me about propitiation, and I gave him an answer, and he goes, "That ain't the answer." Like, ooh, okay. Propitiation. This is the ark of Christ, and these two angels have these their wings that are tipped, and there is a tiny little space between that. That space only is capable to go through. It's like the eye of a needle. Why Jesus used that. It's harder than a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. That's what he says, right? That is the understanding of propitiation. What it comes from is that atoning for the victim. See, when we atone for the victim, see, only Jesus can do that, right? He is he is that victim, and he poured his blood out for us. It is that mercy seat of Christ. This is the mercy seat. This is where we actually need to live within. You have no ability to penetrate that area, but only through Christ when you can go into the mercy seat of God, which is that Ark of the Covenant, and that full-on purity with the Father, because only the Father can do that. So guys, what I'm trying to tell you is, I know this might be like a deep one and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm lost. You might need to spend some time looking at this, because you keep asking for the Lord to be fair in your life. And I'm telling you right now, he is not fair. He's not going to be fair. He is just. And once you understand that, you stop asking the world to have the justice, and you look for God to react in justice in your life. And it will change the prescriptive way that you've handled things. Thanks so much.